Hi, Montse. This is the first of the two problems. The second one is on the second slide, so it'll happen at the end of the video. And here we go. Let's get started. You've got this particular trinomial, and you need to factor it. It's basically said which is the factored form of this trinomial. So as you can see, although they don't all have an x in it, so we can't factor out an x, they all do have a common multiple of 4. I know that you know that. So we factor out that 4, and this is what we're left with. Okay? Um, and what we want to do then is just focus on factoring this further. So forget about the 4. It's going to stay there in the front. We need to keep it there in order for every line to be equal to the one before. But we need to factor this. So what do? We take the a value times the c value, 6 times -5, and we get -30. Okay? So what we want to do then is we want to say, okay, I need to find the factors of -30 that have a sum of this number here, b, okay? Because this is ax squared plus bx plus c, okay? So if we wanted -30, we could, there's two ways you can do it. I'm going to show you the first way, and the book does it this way, but I'll show you my way, which is, I think, is easier if you understand it more, okay? So first you say, okay, you could either do -1 times 30, which sums to 29, or 1 times -30, which sums to -29. You can kind of, you can see that this is a set, right? The 1 times 30 gets you the 30, and in order for it to multiply to be negative, one of them's got to be negative. And you don't know which one, so you try it both ways, and you see what you get, okay? And then you could say, okay, or it could be 2 and 15, right? -2 and 15 is 13. 2 and -15 is -13. Now, as you notice, we want to have 13, so this is going to be the set that we're going to use, okay? But if we wanted to list them all, we could list them all down, and we get all of these, right? See what the sum is. That's one way of doing it, but you're listing each number twice, right? One with a negative and then the other one with a negative. So this is the way that I do it. We say, we know that we need to get a negative number here when we multiply the two numbers. So that one of the numbers, how do you get a negative when you multiply? A positive times a negative, right? So we know that we're going to have one of each. And if we have one of each sign, then we're going to have to subtract these two numbers. So here I can say, I do this. I say, instead of writing -1 and 30 or 1 and -30, I just write 1 and 30. Okay, I write 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. Okay, and what I'm looking for first is one that makes 13 when you subtract them. You're going to subtract them because you're going to get one of each sign, and they're going to cancel out. Okay, so which one subtracts 13? This one does. Okay, now do we want it to be a positive 13 or a negative 13? Well, looking over here, we want it to be a positive, so the bigger one's got to be positive so that there's positives left over. So we would say, okay, then it's going to be positive 15 and -2. And that's just what we got here anyway. Okay? So you can make it a little bit easier on yourself by just listing the positive factors of the positive of a times c, and then say, well, we know it's negative, so they're going to have to subtract to make it. Because, like, if you look at this, these two add together to be 13, but we're not adding them because they're not going to be the same sign and they won't combine. Okay, so that's what we've got. I'm going to erase my underlined line here for a second, and then let's keep going. So now that we have -2 and 15, we're going to rewrite this 13x as -2x and positive 15x. That'll combine to 13x. Okay, this right here combines to 13x, so it's the same thing. You've just split it apart into two pieces. How did you know how to split it apart? Well, you did what we just did here. You took a times c and listed all the factors and found out which two combined to be 13. And as you can see, the two numbers we've got, they combine to be 13. Okay, so what are we going to do now? We're going to group these two together and group these two together and see what we can factor out. And that's the method. The method that we're using to factor this is, okay, you do a times c, you list the factors of a times c that will make the 13, and then you split that 13 into those two parts, and then you group the first two and the second two separately and factor them out. So that's what I've done here. I've just taken these two and grouped them, and taken these two and grouped them as well. I want that negative to stay with this number, so if I didn't put a plus here to say we're adding this amount on, then it would look like you're multiplying the two binomials, and we're not actually multiplying them. So I put that there to make clear that we're just doing this plus this amount, okay, which is the same as subtracting those. Yep. So now what can we factor out of here? Well, they are both multiples of 3, and they both have an x, so we can factor a 3x out. And this is what remains. When you divide this by 3x, you get that. When you divide this by 3x, you get that. Now, what can you factor out of here? Well, if the leading number, if the x term here is negative, you're going to factor the negative out as well. And in fact, except for the -1, there's no common thing that we can factor out. So we just say factor out a -1. And what are we left with? Well, if we divide this by -1, it becomes positive. Divide this by -1, it becomes positive. And then look what we get. We get that same binomial for both of them. That's what we're looking to get if we did it right. Okay? So now what do? Now we take, well, the 4 stays there. This 3x becomes the first of the two terms in that binomial, and this -1 becomes the second of the two terms. So 3x minus 1. That's one of them. And then the thing that you got twice, that's the other one. And that's how you do it. And if you multiply them all together, you would get back to the original trinomial up here. So the first thing you do, factor out any common factor and sit it on the front to simplify what's left. And then you factor that. You take a times c, which is -30, and you list all the factors of -30 and find out which two numbers multiply together to get -30 and add together to be the b value, 13, okay? And then you use those two numbers as the coefficients on x, -2x and 15x, to split this apart into two pieces. By the way, if you put the -2x there and you put the 15x there, it would just come out in a different order, but you'd still get the same thing. You can try it if you're not sure, okay? So this becomes the answer. That's how you do that one. Watch this video again if that was unclear. Now let's look at the other one. It's going to be very easy compared to this one. Okay, so essentially what you're saying is a rectangle has an area of this. So this is its area. And we know that its width is 4x minus 1. What's its length? Well, you do length times width to get the area. So the length we don't know, but the width we do know, the width they told us, and we do know what the area is. So we need to figure out what binomial multiplies with this to make this. And because you're doing it this way, it's actually quite easy, okay? It's quite easy because you can say, well, 4x times what is going to give me 8x squared? Well, 4 times 2 and x times x. So 2x. Oops, let me do a better job of that. So 2x, okay? And then you say, okay, what number multiplies with -1 to get -1? Because the only way that you can get the constant at the end is doing this constant times this constant, okay? So -1 times what will give you -1? Well, +1. So 2x plus 1, okay? And if you wanted to be sure that you were right, you can just FOIL it and check. And if we FOIL it, we say 2x times 4x, 8x squared. 2x times -1, -2x. Oops. 1 times 4x, 4x, and you got to call it a positive 4x. And then 1 times -1, -1. Okay? These two are like terms and will combine together. And what you get as a result is 8x squared plus 2x minus 1. Okay? And that's obviously what the answer is because that's what they gave us. So this then becomes what you were looking for. And again, how did you do it? Well, you already know what one of them is. So you can say, well, what multiplies with 4x to get 8x squared? That's the first term. What multiplies with -1 to get -1? That's the last term. And then just check and make sure that it works. Hope that's helpful.